Suncatchers are a great place for the beginner in stained glass to develop their skills. One can start off with relatively small and simple designs and work up as their skill increases. The cost of getting started can be cut down by using a cut glass pack or a variety pack from Kokomo Opalescent Glass. Suncatchers can be made in all shapes and sizes, seasonal and holiday themes, animals, or anything else that strikes your fancy. They also make great gifts. You will need a plan though. Even something as small as a Suncatcher starts off with a plan that is drawn out and becomes known as a pattern. When using a pattern, the finished product should end up looking like the pattern, only prettier. This is the pattern for our chickadee Suncatcher. It shows the overall outline of the bird, the shapes of the individual pieces of glass, where the wire work will go, and it even explains which colors go where. As pieces are cut, they can be set on top of the pattern to help keep track of what is still needed. So how do we transfer the pattern to the glass? There is more than one correct way to do this. If you're working with cathedral glass, you can set the pattern on top of a light box. You set the glass on top of the pattern, then trace the appropriate parts of the pattern onto the glass. When you're working with opalescent, opalescent combinations, or even with dark cathedrals, this method doesn't work very well. Mark will almost always transfer the pattern onto pattern paper, and then he will cut out the individual pieces from that. He can lay the pattern paper onto his KOG glass and trace around it. When Mark makes something for us, he usually makes more than one. This method allows him to more easily prepare all of the pieces that he needs. Once all of the pieces are drawn onto the glass, you are ready to start cutting them out. Begin by separating one of the pieces from the rest, and then just follow the lines previously drawn onto the glass. Now that everything is cut out, we have a nice collection of bird parts. As you can see, one of the chickadees is laid out on the pattern, giving us a nice glimpse of what the finished product will look like. For the next part, Mark moves to the grinder. A grinder like this one is essential to getting the glass pieces to fit together. Let's compare these two leaves. The one on the right has rough edges with lots of sharp spots. There are bumps on it that will make working with it later much more difficult. The leaf on the left has been ground. It is a lot smoother, will be easier to work with, and it's less likely to cut you. While grinding the glass, Mark keeps a steady and even pressure as he turns the piece with precision. Because he was careful to make good cuts earlier, this piece only takes a few seconds on the grinder. The next step is to foil the pieces. You will wrap the pieces in copper foil tape using a fiddle stick. We cover proper foiling techniques in another video. It's now time to take our foil pieces and turn them into our chickadee Suncatcher using solder. We will once again use the pattern so that we get it right. Mark lays the foil pieces onto the pattern one at a time, using push pins to hold them in place as he goes. Next, he will brush a thin coat of flux onto the joints. Flux helps control the flow of the solder onto the foil and prevents the solder from sticking to the glass. The idea at this point is to put a few drops of solder onto the joints so that the Suncatcher will remain conjoined without the need of push pins. He is using Emerway Onyx 50/50 solder to accomplish this. The pieces will now remain interconnected as the artwork is gently handled. It's time to connect the dots, so to speak. Note that the outside edge of the piece is not soldered on the front, just the joints on the inside. It is then turned over to be soldered on the back. On the back of the Suncatcher, Mark does solder the perimeter foil. Because of his years of experience, Mark makes this look easy. Practice makes perfect. Next, he applies flux to the outer edge of the Suncatcher all the way around it, and then solders. Now it is time to scrape off the foil from the front side perimeter. We won't be soldering there, which will give our completed project a much neater look. The artist uses a razor for this, carefully removing the copper foil and discarding it. He uses sharp lead dikes to cut the foil, being vigilant to not damage the solder on the joints. Our Suncatcher is now ready to be wrapped in lead cane, which will give it strength. A small dot of solder is used when starting the lead to help hold it in place, and also in a couple of places around the Suncatcher. He uses a small scratch awl to press the lead into the corners and crevices of the Suncatcher. As was alluded to earlier, all of the soldering for the lead cane is done on the back side of the Suncatcher. An X-Acto razor is used to trim off the excess cane. The awl is used again to press the lead down tight, and then another dot of solder is used on the finishing end of the lead. We now apply flux to the back side of the piece, and solder the lead to the foil that was itself soldered earlier. And now it's time for the wire work. We refer back to our pattern. The thin lines on it represent the wire work we are now ready to add. You'll want to use 20 gauge solder for this part. Cut off a small piece, about 16 to 18 inches long. Touch this to the lead with a soldering iron. Then gently extend the wire to where it will attach at the other end. Use your lead dikes to snip it off, and then solder it to existing solder work. Repeat this for the other two pieces of wire on the wing. The same techniques are used for the wire work on the tail. Next up, we prepare the leaves. Begin by scraping the foil off the front side of the leaf, then wrap the leaf in lead cane the same way the bird was done. All the soldering is done on the back side of the piece. This is then repeated for any additional leaves. A little wire work is added to the leaves to give them a more realistic look. Lay the leaves onto the chickadee and arrange them to suit. A little flux and some spots of solder will be used to hold them on where the leaves touch the bird and one another. Remember to solder them on the back too for added strength. Our chickadee needs some way to hang, so let's add a ring to the back of it. Whenever possible, solder your ring at a joint. Again, this adds strength. Our chickadee is now ready for a trip to the bird bath. Hand soap, a wet sponge, and a gentle touch are all that's needed to clean them up. Once it's rinsed, you can blot it dry or let it air dry. Time now for some hand-painted details. If you're not good with a paintbrush, don't worry. This part is easier than it sounds. For the eye, put a small dot of white paint. Once it is dry, add a smaller dot of black onto that. Our finished Suncatcher looks true to the pattern, only prettier. Just what we wanted. At Kokomo Opalescent Glass, our artists are proud of what they do and always sign their work. You should too. Did you enjoy this video? Be sure to like it and leave us a comment too. Remember to subscribe to get the latest releases from Kokomo Opalescent Glass.